In this video, I want to show you how to take your data and put it into a graph using Google Sheets. So in the last video, I taught you guys how to take your data and calculate mean, median, mode, standard deviation. That's great. That's a great data table, but it's really nice to take that data and put it into a graphical form. And we've got 12 different students here, and we got a lot of variation in the data. So we don't want to graph every student's data on here. That's not going to be as useful. What we really care about are the mean values for the middle and upper school students. And then we want to also include the standard deviation, which shows the spread. We could take and make a histogram which shows sort of all the individual students' responses into how much they check social media. But we want to just kind of condense that. What's our average? And then show us how much variation is in that data by the standard deviation. In other words, where would 2/3 of the students fall compared to that mean value? Okay, so to do that, I don't want to use all of this data in here. I just want to use sort of my crunch data, my mean values, but I want to keep this up here. So I'm going to create a second data table over here. And to do that, that seems like kind of a pain, but it's really easy. All I need to do is do my equals sign again. Equals again means I'm going to put something here, but then I can just click on this one. Okay. And now you think you do that for all these cells down here, but all I have to do is drag down, right? And oops, one more, and drag over, and I've basically copied all of this data right over here. And then I also, but I want to put this information up here as well. So I'm going to write here equals and social media use and enter. And then I'm just going to drag over and get my labels for those two data sets. Okay, and I like my data tables to be visible in the cells, so I'm going to make them visible. And if you want to get fancy, you can say I want all my data centered in there. Should we center the data? Yeah, if anything's running over, if you have something running over, let me show you what will have the default on here. Sometimes the text will look like this. Ooh, I don't like that. I can't read it very well. It's running into my other cells, right? So you want to come up here to this arrow where it shows the arrow going out of the cell and change that to the arrow folding back in, staying within the cell so that I can see everything nice and clear there. Okay, so now I have a much nicer, sort of smaller, condensed data table, sort of my my summary, okay, of the data. So now I want to just highlight, what do I want? I want to take my mean, I'm going to graph my mean values. I'm going to get my standard deviation later. So I'm going to keep my titles, because that's going to be important, and then my mean values. And the way we're going to graph the mean values is with a column graph. Sometimes we call these a bar graph, but with Excel and Google Sheets, bar graphs tend to go horizontal, column graphs go vertical. So we'll just call it a column graph. Okay, so I've highlighted that. Okay, I want to go to insert, because I'm going to be inserting a chart. Again, they call graphs charts on here. So I want to find chart, click on chart, and I've got this. Okay, notice because I put my title up here, it put my title right here. Okay, and maybe I want to center that. Well, I'll get to that later. I've got my two values here, but notice I can't see which is which. I've got my legend up here. Okay, so that's fine. I'm going to show you guys at the end how to put the labels down here for the middle and upper school students. But you can see we've got it all labeled. I've got our units over there. So what do we need to do? Well, our chart title, since we had it on here, is already in there. If we didn't have that title, we would just type the chart title we wanted in here. Okay. Chart axes, axes titles. So if we go down to that one, I'm sorry, chart title is done, right? So horizontal axes, we've got there, it says mean. We'll just go ahead and change that to, I'm sorry, we've got that in there, social media use, so we'll just keep that. That's pretty good. And vertical axis title. Okay, what do we want over here? So this is going to be the, here we go, it's already recognized. Number of times social media is checked daily. Okay, so that tells me what these numbers are. We don't want any naked numbers on our graph. We want always labeled with the X and Y axis. Okay, so that looks pretty good. And now if we go down to series, this is where we can look at our error bars. Okay, so for our series, we don't want to apply to all series because we have different standard deviations. The default here, it's just going to put the same value on both if we apply to all series. So let's start with middle school students, okay? And then we'll go to error bars. And we don't want to do percents. We're going to be doing a constant value. I know it said standard deviation there, but that's not what we want. We want a constant value of plus or minus 3.22. So we're just going to change this to 3.22. All right, there we go. Oops, 3.22. Don't forget your decimal there. Okay, so you can see it's a fairly large standard deviation. In other words, 2/3 of my data is spread pretty far away from my mean. That's important when we draw our conclusions and we compare the difference between these two. All right, so now let's go back up and go to high school students, upper school students, and go to error bars. And again, we don't want percent. We want to do a constant number. Its default in there is 10. It's not 10, it's 2.71 over here. So I'm going to put in 2.71. And, oh, what happened there? Oops, 271. I keep forgetting to put my decimals in there. All right. All right, there we go. So now when we look at our graph, we can see that, yeah, there's a difference between these two average values, right? So middle school students check social media slightly more than upper school students, right? But is this a significant difference? Well, 2/3 of these guys are within this range. 2/3 of these guys are within this range. If we had really narrow error bars and maybe a larger difference average, we could say, yeah, there's a pretty significant difference. Because we have these large error bars, standard deviation in our data is so large, it's harder to draw that conclusion. That's why it's really important to show that spread in data. And when we can, we're going to try to include those error bars in our data. So the thing I want to show you on here is, so if you don't like this style of column graph, notice these guys are bunched together and we have a legend up here instead of labeling each of our columns. We can go back to the chart editor and go back to setup, and we can click on switch rows and columns. And if you switch rows and columns, you'll notice that they are labeled down at the bottom and there's a space in between them, right? So this is maybe a style you prefer more, or maybe it's a little clearer. So that's an option for your bar graphs that I just wanted to address. And that's it.